Hi everyone, today and tomorrow is Salesforce Development Day 20. Today is day 20. And we'll quickly go through the today's agenda. What are we going to learn today? We'll review the previous session, what we have discussed so far. And then we'll talk about the object-oriented programming. And then we'll talk about the class object and what are the features or pillars of the object-oriented programming. What are the different features that we have in the object-oriented programming? And we'll talk about the class syntax and what is the access modifier and what are the different access modifiers. We will discuss all of them. And what are the ways to define an Apex class? And by using the developer console, we will be creating how to create a class by using the developer console editor. We will see that, and we'll talk about one of the use case and we will implement the use case. Then we'll have a final conclusion, quiz and homework, interview questions. Quickly, so what did we learn so far in last class?
While, do while, for loop and arrays. All the iterative statements.
Iterative statements, yes. So today we are going to focus on object-oriented programming. So from today onwards, we will be starting. We'll go through the basics of object-oriented programming. Then we will start implementing Apex classes. Now, object-oriented programming. Before discussing the object-oriented programming, let's understand what is object. Now, what is the object here? So object is nothing but in the real time, if we have to I'm just taking out into the real time. It's not specific to the Salesforce. So in real time, what is object? Anybody? How can you say object? What is an object in real time which you can link it?
Class methods and data variables.
Okay, that's related to the technical, but without technical.
Any
Anything,
person or
anything we can say object like
Identifies market growth.
Any real world entity.
Okay. So object is basically anything in the real world. That means either object means could be a car. So we will be using the car every day. Object is nothing but could be a specs. Object is nothing but could be a house. Object is nothing but could be a book. In real time, whatever we are using it, everything is an object. That means object is nothing but a thing that you wanted to store and process the data. In another word, object in another word, we call it as an entity. In other word, we call the object as entity. So anything that we are using, object is like a human being, object is a fridge or mirror or anything that you are seeing around you, fan, everything is called as an object in real time. Now let's link this in Salesforce. What is the object-oriented programming language? Now we know what is the object. So object is anything that you wanted to store or a process data is called object. Now what is the object programming language? So basically object programming language is nothing but we know that we have discussed already. So Apex is a cloud-based object-oriented programming language. Apex is cloud-based object-oriented programming language. That means what? We will be writing a business logic here. By using the Apex, we will be writing the business logic. So in order to implement a business logic, right? Where each business logic should be implemented in the form of either it's a class or an object. So Apex is a cloud-based object-oriented programming language where each business logic should be implemented in the form of class and object. So now we will see what is the class and what is the object. So let's see first of all, what is the object-oriented programming language? Object-oriented programming language is nothing but in Salesforce, Apex is a cloud-based object programming language. So in object-oriented programming language, each business logic should be implemented in the form of class and object. Now let's take an example. Here, let's assume that object is nothing but a human being. Object is nothing but a human being. So God has created a human being. So when God has created the human being, there is some properties which he has decided. There are some properties which are decided. That means every human being, whenever the God is created the human being, he created a name. A human being should be having a name. A human being should be having an age, date of birth, height, weight, color, gender, salary, designation, qualification, address. So these are the common properties for every human being. These are common properties for every human being. Let's suppose that yesterday a person born, Ravinder is a born. So name is Ravinder, age is 1 day. So date of birth yesterday, height 1.5 feet, weight 3 kgs, color white, and gender male, salary nothing, designation nothing, qualification nothing, and address high-tech city Hyderabad. So this person has born yesterday. As soon as he born, certain properties will be allocated for that person. That means whether the person is born yesterday or 10 years back doesn't matter. So let's assume that there is a Rana who born 20 years back. Okay, so assume that he is born 20 years back. So in that case, his date of birth, height, weight, everything will be allocated and the designation developer. So that means not only these two members, every human being having these properties. Every human being having a properties here. Now, in this case, Ravinder and Rana, whatever these names are there, right? So this is called object. That means this is called object. Ravinder is a object. Rana is a object. Ravinder is object and Rana is object. Now, in this case, every object is associated with the class. And human being here is a class. Every object is associated with the class. So class contains a set of properties. Now class contains set of properties. So this class is containing the set of properties, or it is called as a blueprint. So class can have one or more objects. It is possible that class can have one object or can have a multiple object. Object is nothing but here it is storing the data. The blueprint is providing the information to object, and object is taking that blueprint and adding the information to that. That means adding the data. So that means objects are holding a data here. That means whenever the object is holding a data, that means a memory gets allocated for the object. For the object, a memory gets allocated. Whereas for the class, memory is not allocated because class is a blueprint or it is having a certain properties, but there is no value assigned to it. It's just a blueprint. But as soon as the person here, as soon as the object is created, right? Based on this blueprint, whenever the object is created, we are allocating a data to it. So whenever the data is assigned to that particular properties, then the memory start allocating to the object. So that means object is a reference of class or an instance of a class. Right? So if you take another example, let's say that house. Whenever you are building it, whenever you want to build house, that means you wanted to start building the house probably in next 2 months. In next 2 months, you wanted to start building the house. So that means what you will do first, you will go to the designer or architect, and then we'll have a the blueprint, how house should look like. So here 1 BHK, that means 1 bedroom here, and this side is a kitchen, and this is hall. Everything you will design it, right? How if I build a house, how it should look like. So where is the bedroom, and where is the kitchen, and where is the hall, and if there is like a lift is there, so which side it should come, this side or this side. So everything you will do the blueprint. That means on paper you draw everything, because tomorrow if I build a house, it should look like as a architecture, whatever I'm printing on the paper. So this is the blueprint. So what we will do, this blueprint, we will give it to the constructor, saying that build a house similar to this. So here, what are the blueprint is there? This is called a class. This is called a class. In this class, I have a certain properties. Properties are 3 rooms. How many rooms, right? How many doors, rooms, doors, and lift, whatever other properties are there. Every property will be there in this class. Now, object is nothing but once you build the house, you can take any color, any color, wall color, or anything you can take it. That doesn't matter. But finally, what are the blueprint is saying the properties is that properties are there or not. Like how many doors, like 3 doors, how many rooms, like 3 rooms. So once you build the house is nothing but a object. House is nothing but a object. Now here blueprint is nothing but a class. So object is whatever this object is there. This object is this object are holding the data. That means memory is allocated for a object, whereas class does not allocate. Class is just a blueprint. Class is just a blueprint. Once you assign the value to the class, that means the object, then it start allocating the memory. That means object is a reference of a class or instance of a class. Now, let's move on. So object is each business logic should be implemented in the form of either class and object. Now, class is nothing but it's a physical entity or a property or a blueprint. As we have discussed, class is nothing but a blueprint, which can contain set of members inside it. There is some members, that means there is a variables, or there is some date, some methods, or some variable declaration, right? So these will be there inside the class. Now, a class can have one or more variables. It is possible that a class can have one or more variables or one or more methods. And properties, constructors, procedures, and functions also there inside it. Can have one function, which is nothing but one method or a multiple methods. So to access the class member, we need to reference a reference called an object. Now I'm implementing a class. I'm implementing a class by writing a variables, functions, properties, everything I'm implementing it. But that is just a blueprint. But in case if I wanted to access this class or a member of this class, we need to reference a called as an object. Now, what is an object here in technically? Object is nothing but object is logical entry which contains the values for the class member. That means assigning the values to the property. Whatever the class is containing the property, right now those properties does not have. So by using the object, we are going to assign the values logically to the class members. So object is also called as an instance of class. Instance of class. So we can have one or more objects for a class. Each object will hold a different values for the class members. So as I explained, memory will be allocated for each object. So objects are supporting the dynamic memory allocation so that can avoid the memory wastage. That means whenever you assign a value to the property, whenever you assign a value to the variable, only that time it is going to allocate a memory. Because if I say that, as soon as I say integer here, as soon as I say integer A, means what? This is just, I'm defining it, but I'm not allocating anything here. I'm not allocating anything. So as soon as I say here A equal to 7, that means a memory gets allocated to the A, and in that the space is getting created. Space is getting created. Now, any questions on the object-oriented programming language and class object? Okay, so let's go on. Questions. What is a class here?
Blueprint, I think.
It is a blueprint.
Physical
Blueprint.
entity.
Physical entity or prototype and
Contains all the numbers inside.
Set of properties.
Set of properties inside it. Yes. So class is nothing but a physical entity or a prototype. We can call it as a prototype or a blueprint which contains the set of members or a set of property inside the class. And what is object?
This is a logical entity which contains the values for the data members.
The values of
Instance of a
members.
class.
Object is an instance of a class, or object is a logical entity which
Logical
contains the values for the class members. Whenever the values are containing the class members is nothing but that is object. Now, in order to implement a object-oriented programming in Apex, we have a certain features, or we have a pillars. Pillars is nothing but it's required. If you wanted to implement an object-oriented programming language inside the Apex, we need to understand the features. So we have 4 features. The first one is a encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, polymorphism. So these 4 features or these 4 pillars are the main if you wanted to implement any class in the Apex. So let's understand what is the encapsulation, what is the abstraction, what is the inheritance, what is the polymorphism. So encapsulation. So encapsulation is nothing but, let's take an example of capsule. Now, that the medicine capsule. So if you take here this capsule, inside, assume that whatever you see small white balls are called as a variables. What are the small white balls are there here? It's called as a variable. And what are the blue balls are there? It's called a method. What we are doing here basically, I'm grouping them. I'm combining them everything and placing into one capsule. Grouping everything and placing it to capsule is called as this capsule is nothing but a class. So encapsulation is nothing but grouping it. Grouping. So like in Apex, if you say data and functions or a methods, when we like data is nothing but a variables. So variables and methods or a functions, everything I'm combining it, everything I'm grouping it. So group, that means we use a encapsulation. Encapsulation is used to group a set of members together into a single entity. That means I'm combining everything and placing it to single entity or a single object. So which is called encapsulation. Encapsulation is used to group a set of members together into a single entity. That means I'm combining everything into it. I'm combining everything into one entity. So how can we achieve this? We can achieve this combining it using the class. And we also have something called interfaces. So by using this, we can achieve the encapsulation. We can achieve encapsulation. So encapsulation can be achieved with the help of classes and interfaces. Now the next one is we have abstraction. What is abstraction? Let's take an example. Let's take an example of car. Let's take an example of car. So we all know that what is the purpose of car. We know like when we wanted to go to supermarket or a shopping, then we will just use it. You will go by car. So that means people do not think of a car. Car has a tons of or thousands of individual parts. There are so many parts inside the car, right? There are so many parts inside the car, but we don't think when we are driving it, right? So we don't think what is this part in the car, what is this part in the car, or what will happen, how the engine works, how the transmission works, how the braking system works, right? We don't think all of this. Now, if I press brake, what will happen behind the engine, which all parts is going to move. We don't think anything when we are driving it. Our focus is just sit on the car and go for a drive, right? Go for a drive. And we do not think what are the parts are there. We don't know what are those, why it is used. We don't know. So that means we are hiding the complexity, right? So we are hiding whatever the parts are there inside that, the complexity, the formula, whatever is written behind the car, how the engine works, how the braking works, how the transmission works. We don't know that all complexity is hidden. All the complexity is hidden, and they have given a object called car to the people. Now you use a key, start the key, go for a shopping. And whenever you wanted to put a brake, put the brake. That's it. There is nothing we need not to think anything there. And there is another example, like everybody is using the WhatsApp. Everybody is using the WhatsApp. Now we know how the WhatsApp user interface looks like. We know how the WhatsApp user interface looks like. But do we know that what technology is used behind the WhatsApp? Whether they have used Java, they have used something latest model, or they have just used the C, or they have just used the Salesforce, we don't know. And what database model they are using it, we don't know. And in the WhatsApp, there are many options are there. Like when I click on it, settings link to my desktop, so many options are there. Now I'm just using the user interface. Like, I don't know when I press this, what all the things are happening behind it, we don't know, right? But there is a technology or there is a complexity is there behind the WhatsApp, because lack of people are using the WhatsApp. Now, if I change my setting, it should not impact other user settings. Only it should impact my user settings. That means how complexity is there behind the WhatsApp. There are a lot of complexity. It's also driving based on the user or driving based on the phone number, right? So that complexity is hidden and given as the user interface. You use whatever you want on the user interface. Similarly, car is a user interface. Now you use it whatever you want, but whenever you see that some technical, some parts are not working, then we will start digging into the defect. What is the problem inside the car? So abstraction is nothing but we use an abstraction. Abstraction is used to provide the interface to the users. That means user interface. They are providing the interfaces to the users, but without providing the complexity of implementation. We are not exposing the complexity, the code, the WhatsApp code. We don't know what is written there. We cannot see the WhatsApp code, right? If somebody is using the application, like you are using the Facebook application or you are using the LinkedIn application, we don't know what complexity has written, what is the code is written, we don't know. So we will hide that complexity to the end users. So that is how we will do it using the abstraction. So abstraction is used to provide the interfaces to the users, but without providing the complexity of an implementation. And by using the abstraction, we can achieve the data hiding. We cannot show all of the information to the user. We cannot show all of the information to the user. Now, next one is inheritance. Okay, before going to the inheritance, any questions so far? Encapsulation, abstraction. Okay, so inheritance is nothing but, let's assume that I have a class. I have a class. Now, when we are implementing this class, there is a certain features. There is a certain features which are implemented within this class. There are certain features which are implemented, maybe some methods, methods, variables, everything that I have implemented. Now I have another class. Assume that this is a class A and the other one is class B. Class B. Now, what are the features we have here? What are the features that are there in class A? So these features, that means we can acquire these features of one class into another class. I can use the features of a class A into class B. Is nothing but an inheritance. I'm inheriting the features of some other class to the another class. I'm inheriting the class A features to the class B. So inheritance is used to acquire the features of one class into another class, so that we can achieve the reusability. I need not to write a code multiple times. If there is a feature that is implemented here, and this feature is common for almost all the functionality, in that case, I do not want to repeat the same logic in the class B or a class C or a class D. I can use this feature by inheriting the class A into the class B. Right? So by using this inheritance, we can achieve the reusability of implementation. Now, the last one is polymorphism. The last one is polymorphism. Now, polymorphism is basically, it's not an English word. It's not an English word. Polymorphism is nothing but is Greek word. It's not an English word, it's a Greek word. So that means if you divide this word, poly plus morphism, if you divide this word, polymorphism, that means actual meaning of the polymorphism is many forms. Many forms. So polymorphism is nothing but a many forms. So let's take a scenario. I'm implementing a function called addition. I'm implementing a function called addition. Now inside this addition, I needed two parameters or two signatures. Two signatures, or we call it as a parameter. So let's say that input 1, input 2, these two parameters are needed, or these two signatures are needed. Now this method is called by almost from three different places. We are calling this function. Now there is one more place which we need to call this one, but that's required, that is passing the three parameters. That means there is another function which is passing the three input field, which is passing the three input field. Now, if I change the above one, if I change this, right, it is going to impact the three functions which are already using it. Everything is working fine. Everything is working fine. Now, because we have introduced something, but I need a same feature, everything should be same. I need everything should be same. But only the thing is the parameter or the signature is a different. Or the signature is different. That means the above one has a two parameters or a two signature. The second one has a three parameters or a three signatures. Now, let's assume that I have implemented this method using the same name. I have implemented the first one as well as I have implemented the second one. I have implemented the first one as well as I have implemented the second one. Whenever these three are calling, like whenever the user interface is clicked on some button, when they clicked on some button, it should go to this method only. It should not go to this method. Because when it is passing it, like it has to check what are the signatures that are coming. So based on the signature, either you call this method or this method. If you are passing the three signatures, then call this method. If you are passing the two signature, then call this method. You can implement multiple methods with the same name. You can implement multiple methods with the same name, but you need to have a different signature. You need to have a different signature. So whenever you are calling it, based on the how many signatures are there, based on that particular method gets executed. How this is going to be implemented using the polymorphism, which is nothing but a many forms. Which is nothing but many forms. So polymorphism is nothing but by using the polymorphism feature, we can define the multiple functions with the same name. I can define multiple functions with the same name with different signature. That means I can add addition, same method name, I can use it multiple times. But only thing is that the parameters, one method has two parameters, another method has three parameters. So if you are defining the multiple functions or multiple methods with the same name, then you need to specify the signature. Different signature should be there, where the signature includes the number of parameters. So type of parameters and order of the parameters, right? So this is possible using the polymorphism, and we can implement this inside the Apex. So there are two types of polymorphisms are there. One is compile time polymorphism. Compile time polymorphism. And then we have, which is also called as a static binding, which is also called as a early binding. Some people say early binding, some people say static binding, and few members says compile time polymorphism. This is the first one. And the second one is a runtime polymorphism. Second one, a runtime polymorphism or a dynamic binding or a late binding. So polymorphism has a two types, which is a early binding, late binding. Early binding, late binding. Compile time polymorphism, runtime polymorphism. Static binding, dynamic binding. So two types of polymorphism. So when I say compile time polymorphism, how can we implement? Using the overloading function. Using the overloading function. Now here overloading can be done in two ways. One is method overloading and the second one is constructor overloading. You can implement the overloading using in the polymorphism. One is method overloading, second one is a construct overloading. And whereas a late binding, if you wanted to implement a runtime polymorphism, or if you wanted to implement dynamic binding, how can we implement? Using the overriding. Concept called overriding. So by using the overriding, we can implement runtime polymorphism. And overriding can be done only one way, which is a method overriding. We cannot do constructor overriding. Only one way, which is method overriding. Now, any questions so far? Okay. No. What are different features of object-oriented programming language?
Encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, polymorphism.
It has four types: encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, polymorphism. Now, what is the encapsulation?
Use it to group a set of members into a single entity or a single object.
Grouping the methods into a single entity.
Grouping the methods into single entity. Right. What is the abstraction?
Is basically
It
data hiding.
provides an interface to the
Provides the
users.
user interface to the user, and
By
complex
hiding the
functionality
complex.
can be hidden.
Right. Inheritance.
To acquire the features of one class into another class.
Acquiring the features of one class to
And
another.
achieve the reusability.
Right. Polymorphism.
Can define
Many
multiple
forms.
functions with the same name. Multiple functions with same name.
We can implement multiple functions with the same name, but
With
it
the
has
different signatures.
right. It has to have a different signatures.
Signatures in the sense parameters, right?
Parameters, yes. What are different type of polymorphisms?
Two types.
What are
Dynamic,
those?
runtime polymorphism.
Compile time.
Compile time
Runtime.
Compile time.
Compile time, runtime,
Early binding.
static binding, early binding, runtime polymorphism,
Runtime
dynamic
polymorphism, dynamic binding, lazy binding.
So how can we implement compile time polymorphism?
Method
overloading.
Overloading.
overrides,
Constructor.
method overload, constructor overload.
Right. Runtime.
Overriding. Overriding. Method overriding.
Right. So now we'll go for a class syntax. Now syntax for the class. How can we write? How can we start writing the class? Now syntax is the first thing which we have to mention is access modifier. Whenever we are implementing a class has to start with access modifier. After entering the access modifier, we'll talk about the what is access modifier. Once we enter the access modifier, the next one is we have to specify the second keyword called with sharing, without sharing. We have to specify with sharing, without sharing. Now this with sharing, without sharing, we will see whenever we are discussing visual force, how to call the visual force from the apex. That time we will see. But the format, the syntax is access modifier with sharing, without sharing. Then you need to specify the keyword called class. Keyword called class. And after that, class name. Access modifier. This is a optional. With sharing, without sharing is a optional. You can write, you cannot write. This is a optional. Access modifier. For normal classes, access modifier, the keyword class, and then we have a class name. Access modifier, class name. And then open curly braces and the close curly braces. Within this, we will be writing or defining the members or defining the variables or implementing the business logic or writing the methods, implementing the methods, whatever the business logic that I wanted to write, everything we will be writing within the class. You cannot start a class without access modifier. You cannot start writing a class without access modifier. Access modifier is must mandatory. It is a must and mandatory. And with sharing, without sharing is an optional keyword. Whenever we are discussing about the sharing part, that time I'll talk about the with sharing, without sharing, default sharing as well. Any generic class, if you wanted to implement, you have to use the access modifier, the class keyword. This is a standard keyword, class keyword, and then class name. So that means example. Okay, before that, we need to learn the access modifier. Now, what is the access modifier here? Access modifier is basically whenever the user enters on the user interface, let's assume that user is entering some data here. User is entering some data. When the user enter the data, who all can see this data? Who all can see this data? Now we from the user interface, we have a business logic here, right? So, and then we have a database, the other side. So whenever we are capturing the information from the user interface, so access modifier is basically decides, access modifiers decides who all can see the data, who all can see data, whether only that particular org members should see the data or there is another members also. That means assume that I have a org here. I have a org, which is, let's assume that this is the org 1. And we have another org. Assume that there are 2 other orgs out there. And this is the org 2. And this is org 3. Now, if I'm implementing a class here, if I'm implementing a class, this is a class 1. Whenever I'm implementing a class, now this, whatever we are writing the logic, who all can see the data. So this class decides whether the data should be visible to within this org, whether the data should be visible to within this org, or is the data should be visible to org 2 or this, or everybody should be visible, or only the org should be visible to only within this class. So access modifier is going to ask us, do you want only the data should be visible within this class? If I have another class outside, let's suppose I have another class, which is a class 2. Now I have another class. Assume that this is a class 2. Now, access modifier is going to tell us, do you want the whatever we are initializing here, do you want to only access within this class, or do you want that particular property or that particular variable, whatever we have declared, should be accessible by class 1, should be accessible by class 2, and everybody should be able to access? Do you want that, or do you want the other orgs also? You wanted to share the information. Everything can be decided by the access modifier. Everything can be decided by the access modifier. So while declaring the class, while implementing the class, if I mention access modifier only within this, that whatever I'm writing the class, only it is accessible by only within this, cannot be accessed outside, cannot be accessed by the other classes also, or cannot be accessed by the org2, cannot be accessed by the org3. Only this class should be visible, only that particular one. So that means we don't want outside anybody calling. Or do you want anybody within the org? So in order to decide that, in order to make the system to understand, there are 4 types of access modifiers. There are 4 types of access modifiers to make the system to understand what type of class. So those are private access modifier, public access modifier, protected access modifier, global access modifier. Private, public, protected, global. 4 are there: private access modifier, public access modifier, protected access modifier, global access modifier. Now, when I say private, what is that means? So private is nothing but a private member of the class can be accessible within the class only. That means if I declare any class, let's assume that if I say private class 1, let's assume that this is a private class. My class name is private class. Now, what will happen if I declare like this the class? This class only accessible within this. That means if I declare this class, right, that class is only within this. Nobody can access this private class. If arg2 wants to call the private class, they cannot call, because the access modifier is private. If arg3 wants to call the private class of the org1, if they are trying to reach out, it will reject it. It will not allow us to connect it. So that means it will go back saying that this class is not available. The response will, when the org3 trying to connect, okay, org3 says that, okay, I wanted to connect private class, okay, or the class 2. So whenever the class 2 wants to connect to the private class, it says that the response which they will get it, the class does not exist, because its access modifier is a private. Whenever we say private, it's only within that class only. We cannot access the members outside of the class. That means if the user did not provide by default, so let's assume that in case Okay, access modifier, we use it for the class declaration as well as we use it for the variable declaration. So far we have declared the integer a, like this we have declared, right? So for variable declaration also, we use an access modifier in class. So that means if I say private integer a, right? If I say private integer a, that means this particular class can be accessed or whatever I have declared the variable, that variable will be accessed only within that particular class. Only within that particular class. Now let's say that if I do not mention the private. Now, so we have seen that I have not mentioned the private. Whenever we were doing some examples in the anonymous window, we did not mention any access modifier. I directly use the integer a, right? And we directly return the integer b. And we have written that integer result equal to a plus b, some calculation which we have written. So I'm not writing the access modifier here, but how the system got executed. So whenever we do not write any access modifier, system by default, it will take it as a private. Apex by default, it will consider as a private. By default, it will consider as a private. So if I do not specify any access modifier, that means it's a private. So for variables, if I don't specify anything, by default, it is going to be the private. So if the user did not provide any access modifier for the class variable, then Apex will treat the variable as a private by default. Now, can be applicable only for variables and the test classes. Where we use the private, we will be using it only for the variable declaration. That means only for variable, we use it private integer sum. Only for variable declaration, or else test classes is something different. So for the test classes only we use it. We never declare a Apex class with the private until unless there is a reason why we are using the private. Most of the times for any generic Apex classes, we do not use the access modifier private. Unless until if there is any specific scenario. So far, I don't know, those scenarios will come when you start implementing the code, when you start developing the code. And after developing the code, you see certain issues. So based on that, you will decide what kind of an access modifier is required. So normal business logic cannot be defined with the private. We cannot use the private while defining the classes that can be used only for the variable and test. So that means, so what are the example? Here I have used it. We cannot use the private while declaring the private class. Now the next one which we have a public. Next one which we have a public. Now if I say public class, then open, close. Inside that, let's assume that if I say public here, public integer a. Now, what is the public means? So if I declare this keyword within this, if I declare that keyword within this, assume that I have declared that particular keyword within the class 1. Now, when I declared this variable within the class 1, now that means if class 2 wants to talk to the class 1, if class 2 wants to use the integer a, they can use it. That means the integer A can be used in class 2 if I have any other classes within the org. Let's assume that I have another classes also, which is a class 3. Now, whatever the classes I have, everybody can call the integer. So this, if I say access modifier public means class 2 can call this particular integer A, class 3 also can call, class 4 also call. Everybody within the org can be accessed by everybody within the org. Everybody can access within the org. That means this particular variable can be accessed by anybody. Whoever is calling this class, they can access this integer A. Everybody can access within the org, but not the org2, not the org3. These two cannot access. These two cannot access. Only within the org can be accessed. So public so access modifier public. So that means public members can be accessible within the organization from the classes. If any of the classes wants to call that particular member, they can call it. But these members cannot be accessible from outside of the organization. That means these two outside of the organization means whoever is the orgs are there which are connected to org1, they cannot access the public member. Now the next one is a protected. Now the protected is introduced because of the inheritance. Protected is introduced because of the inheritance. That means, let's see the definition. This can be applicable for the class variables. Protected members can be accessible from within the class from all the delivered or a child classes inside the organization. That means if I have to use, so for the public, for the protected one, let's say that if I'm using the protected here, if I'm declaring protected integer A, if I say this, the class 2, if the class 1 is inherited within the class 2, that means class 2 is a child class 1 is a parent class. As soon as you inherit the class 1 within the class 2 became a child and class 1 is parent. When you inherit the class 1, when the class 1 is inherited, only that time we can use the protected. Only that time only we can access the protected members. If there is another one, class 3, they cannot call this protected variable. They cannot call this protected variable because class 1 is not inherited in class 3. It's not inherited in the class 3. Protected variables can be called by other classes only when the class is inherited within the other class. That means if you inherited, as soon as you inherited, this class 2 became a child component of class 1. So class 1 became a parent component. So when you have that relationship, then only the protected can be accessed. Protected members can be accessible from within the class, from all the derived, that means all the inherited, for all the child classes. Only for the child classes, these protected variables can be called. Any questions so far? Okay. And the last one, and then we cannot access these members from the other independent classes inside the organization. When I say in independent classes is nothing but we have a class 3. It's a independent. Now, when it is a independent, there is a no relationship between the class 1 and class 3. That means they cannot access the protected variables. They cannot access the protected members or protected variables. And the next one is a global. This is the last one. Global is access modifier global. That means global members can be accessible from within the organization as well as from the outside of the organization. That means if I say here, integer is a in here, if I declare it global integer A. So that means everybody can access. This one can be accessed in class 2, can be accessed in class 3, can be accessed in class 4. Everybody from the organization can be accessed, as well as the org2 members also can be accessed, as well as org3 members also accessed. Everybody can access whenever I say global integer. So global members can be accessible from within the organization and from outside of the organization also. Now, there is a question, whoever is applying for the freshers or a 1-year experience, they will ask a question, what is the differences between the public and global? When I say public, only that particular org can be accessed. When I say global, everybody can access. Public is public. When we say the access modifier, public is nothing but that whatever the public variable is there, that variable or that member can be accessed from by anybody within the org1, but it cannot be accessed by the org2 or it cannot be accessed by the org3. Whereas global, it can be accessed from the org1 as well as the outside of the org also, they can access the global. Now, when I use the global is used when we are declaring the batch, when we are implementing the batch classes, when we are implementing the interfaces, So these are the scenarios that time we have to use the global. So all batch Apex classes, scheduled classes, web services, which is nothing but an integration, API, and then these are the mostly whenever we are implementing the batch Apex class or a scheduled class or a web services class or API class. Whenever we are implementing these classes, we must use the global access modifier. We cannot use the public. Web services is nothing but the third party is talking to our org, or they are trying to get the information from our org. So in that case, the access modifier should be a global. Now, a business logic, whenever we are implementing a business logic, we can always use the public and global. Business logic, we cannot use if we are implementing the business logic. That means when we are implementing the Apex class, we should use either public access modifier or should be used global access modifier. You cannot use private or protected. You cannot use this. You cannot use this access modifier for declaring the Apex class. So we always use either public or global. Now, all the Apex classes will get resides inside the object Apex classes. That means all the Apex classes, whatever we are implementing the Apex classes, we have a tab in the Salesforce or the option. When you go for a setup and if you search for Apex classes, everything can be sits into the Apex class. And if you wanted to run a query, so we have an object called Apex class. We have a object called Apex classes. So whatever you wanted to know, everything can be resides inside the object called Apex classes. Now every Apex classes will be saved with extension of .apxc. If you are writing any Apex class and if you are saving it, it always ends with extension called .apxc. Now, any questions so far? Okay. So what is the syntax for class?
Access modifier.
Access modifier shared with
Access
without
modifier with sharing, without sharing. Class name.
class.
Class name, yes. What are different access modifiers we have?
Public, private,
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 public,
protected,
protected, and global.
and global.
Right. So what are differences between the public access modifier and global access modifier?
Public access modifier, it can be shared within the org with global
Within
outside.
the org. Global within the org and outside of the org.
Right. Now let's see what are the ways to define a Apex class. Now we can define it from the multiple places by using the standard navigation, by using the developer console, by using the Visual Studio. Either of three ways we can define the Apex class. Now in standard navigation, when you go to the Salesforce, if you search here Apex class, now here we have an option called new. So when you click on new, that means you are ready to create an Apex class. So this is the standard navigation. Now we'll come to this later. Now what we will do is we will use the developer console. So by using the developer console, how can we implement Apex class? Like opening up the developer console editor, then we have to click on a file, new Apex class. Enter the Apex class name inside the text box. Like it will give a dialog box. Let me open the developer console editor. File, closer, file, new Apex class. Now it gives this box and enter the Apex class name here. And then click on OK. Once you click on OK, we can start implementing the business logic inside the class. And once we have written the logic, you can use either Control+S to save the record, or if you are using a Mac, you have to use the Command+S. So that is the navigation steps. Now let's take a use case. Let's assume that I have a use case, define an Apex class to manage the employee details. In order to implement this in the Apex class, I need to declare a certain variables. What are the variables? I need an employee ID. I need an employee name. I need an employee address. I need an employee email ID, joining date, and is active. These are the variables that I wanted to declare within the Apex class. Now, if I wanted to declare the Apex class, what is the data type that I need to use it for the employee ID? Integer. Employee name?
String.
String. Employee address,
String.
email ID,
String.
string. Joining date,
Date.
Date,
is active.
Boolean.
boolean.
So now if I wanted to implement, so this is the use case. Now first assume that I'm creating the Apex class. When I start implementing the Apex class, what is the starting keyword that I have to use it?
Public.
Public, public
Public
or global.
and then public
Name.
Class.
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 Keyword. Then class name.
Employee detail.
Let's take class name, employee details.
Details.
Then within this curly braces. Now I need variables employee ID, which is the integer. Now, if I do not specify the access modifier for variable, by default, what it will take?
Private.
Private it will take.
So let's keep it as a public here. So public integer employee ID, public
String, employee name.
string employee name. And then we have a public string employee address. So this is how we are going to declare it. Now let's go ahead and implement that. So what I did, I clicked on a file, new Apex class, and then we have to specify the Apex class name. Let's say that employee details. Now, whenever you create a Apex class, you will see here starting up API version. This API version should be always latest, and it will automatically take it as a latest one. It will automatically take this as a latest one. In case if you wanted to shift, you can shift it, but by default, it will take the latest API version name. Now this code coverage, right now we are not going to use it. This is why we need it is whenever we wanted to implement a test classes, that time we need this button is useful. Right now this button is not useful. And okay, we'll do it later. And below you will see here, in case if there is any problem, it is going to show me in the problem section. Let's suppose that I'm declaring here public integer employee ID. Now I do not specify the semicolon there. And what I'll do is I'll go for the next line, public string employee name. Public string address. Now, if I try to save this, so what happened? It is given an error. So whenever there is an error, you will get this symbol. You will get this symbol. Whatever you see here, the symbol, exclamation, you will get that exclamation either in the next line or in the same line. Whenever you have this exclamation error, that means there is something wrong with your line of code. Something wrong with your line of code. Now you can see here unexpected token employee ID, right? And unexpected token employee ID, and then unexpected token public. semicolon is missing. Now, if you try to save this, save. Now I'm removing the second one. In the second line, I'm removing the semicolon. Same issue, unexpected token, unexpected token, unexpected token. Right? So let's save this. Now, there are other also public date string are done. Date of birth, public date, joining date. What else we have? Is active. Public Boolean is active. Yeah. Now this is a class. Now we have created a class here. There is no error in the problem. Now if I go to the standard navigation, click on refresh. You can see that there is a class gets created here. The class name is employee details. API version is 57. Status is active. Size without comments 192. The last modified by this person. And if you wanted to edit, you can edit it. So in the standard navigation, when you edit the Apex class, it goes like this. Now, if you wanted to add another variable here, let's assume that I wanted to add public, let's add the salary, decimal, employee salary. Now, here we have a two option. Quick save means save it and keep the screen in the edit mode. But when you click on a save, it will save it and it will revert back to the read-only mode. Right? It is coming back to your original one. Now, quick save is going to help you in the navigation because that is going to give us the more information in case if you wanted to modify and if you are playing with this, fixing the multiple issues, use the quick save. And here's the second tab. The first tab is a Apex class. Second tab is a version settings. Now here also we have a version setting, the same one which we have seen in the developer console. In the developer console, API version. Now here you have a version setting, API version is a 57. You can modify it from here also. Now cancel this. Now, on the Apex class in the standard navigation, we have a name. A name is mentioned. You can see the name and what is the status of it. By default, it is active. Created by, and right now the code coverage is 0%. There is nothing is there. And then we have a last modified by. We have last modified by. And below that, if you see here, this is a class body. Whatever we have written the class, it is showing in the proper format. Now, if you click on a class summary, right now there is nothing. Version setting, it's a version setting and trace flag. Now, if you wanted to add any trace flags, you can add it by clicking on this new button. Now it goes to the debug log. In the debug log, you can give that particular Apex class and you can add the trace log. Trace log is nothing but a debug log. So let me switch back to the Apex. Okay. So trace flag is nothing but, for example, you are in this you're doing something and suddenly you wanted to place a flag to it. So what you can do, you can click on this trace flag so that you can apply the debug log onto it. Now we have a buttons here, edit, to edit the class. If you wanted to delete the class, you can delete it by selecting this button. And when I say download, now it has downloaded a file which is in the, I can open in the Internet Explorer, which is extension is .cls. Just a second. Let me open that. So this is what it is downloaded. Right click, open in Notepad++. I can see that information. I can see the information, employee details. Now security. So the security part is who all can see this particular Apex class. Who all can see this particular Apex class. Right now, only the system admin is there. Now, in case if you wanted to share this Apex class with the partner community login user or some community users, partner community users, or you wanted to share with the customer community users or external ID identity user, anyone if you wanted to share, you can select that particular profile and move it here. And if you click on a save button, what will happen? That particular class is going to share with different profiles. That particular class is going to share with different profiles. Now the fourth button is a show dependencies. Now sometimes what happens is when in the real time, when we are implementing a class, when we are implementing the class, assume that this is the class which I'm implementing it. This is the class 1. And within the class, I'll call another class. Assume that there is a class. There is just a class 0 is there. I'm calling that class 0, as well as I'm calling the object fields. I'm calling it. And there are multiple things which I'm calling inside this class. Now, whenever I wanted to know, because I need to play with this particular class, so I wanted to know what are the dependencies on this class. What are the dependencies on this class? Now, if I wanted to delete this class, assume that I wanted to delete this class. Now, before deleting it, I wanted to check the dependencies. Who all can be referred here. Right, so I'll check who are referring this particular Apex class. Who all are referring this Apex class. So if there is a nobody is referring it, then it will say nothing is there. That means right now I have an employee details. Right now I have an employee details. Assume that there is another class. Assume that company details is the another class. Company details is the another class. Now, this particular class is calling the employee. So that means here it is calling the employee details. It is calling the employee details so that the data or the features, whatever we have in the employee details, everything will be there inside this company details. Now, if I delete this particular variable, if I delete this particular Apex class, it is going to impact the company details. It is going to impact the company details. So that's the reason we have to first cross verify if I am deleting any Apex class, if I'm deleting any business logic, just check what are the dependencies are there. If it is an independent class, go ahead and delete. If the requirement is to delete this, and if it is an independent class, you can approve, you can go ahead and delete it, but confirm it with the architect, confirm with your client. This is truly not needed class, then only delete it. Otherwise, don't delete in the real time. Right? So these are the one, and right now, whatever you see here, the buttons generate from Visual is used for the integration. And this run all tests is for the test classes. Schedule Apex is for the schedule. So these three buttons we will be discussing later. These three buttons will be discussing later. Now dynamic Apex classes also we'll see later. Now, any questions so far? So here Apex code is an object-oriented programming language that allows the developer to develop on-demand business application on the Lightning platform. On demand. If we have a truly the requirement from the client, it says that there is some requirement which we need to implement it and which cannot be fulfilled through the configuration, then only go for the Apex class. Any other questions? Okay, homework 1. Define an Apex class to the manage product details. Now here, the certain variables are product name, product code, quantity, and contact number, manufacturing date, expiry date, unit price is in stock. Is in stock. Now, if you observe, while declaring the variables, how I'm doing it, first I'm starting with small letter. And then once the word is ending, whenever I start the next word, the capital it's getting started. So it's always the variable names always starts with a capital. Once the word is ended, then it starts with a capital. So let's say that it's a product details. Now, when I have a product details, I'll say that product details, or I can say product details, camel format. So it's always starts with small letters. In between, we'll have a capital letters. Similarly, if you are going to implement a class for the product details, use the product name. So what are the variables that are required to understand the product details is we need a product name, product code, quantity, contact number, manufacturing date, what is the expiry date of the product, and what is the unit price, what is in stock. What is in stock. Now the second homework is define an Apex class to manage the client details. In order to manage the client details, we need client name, client location, what is the project that I'm handling with the client, what is the revenue, what is the revenue, is this client is new or not, what are the data types for this?
String, integer or decimal, boolean.
Revenue, what is the data type?
Decimal.
Decimal.
We can take numeric data type.
Yeah. So next one is define an Apex class to manage the customer details. Now here we need a variables, customer name, customer number is VIP customer. And the next one is a manage, define an Apex class to manage project details. So this is like a real time, like how many projects we have, what is the project name, and what is the state of the project. right? And then we have how many members do we need to implement this project? What is the project start date? What is the project end date?
Swapna, we create them as class variables. It's not necessary we need to create them as objects and fields in Salesforce, right?
Can you repeat that, Rana?
We are only creating a class. We are not going to create the object and the fields,
No.
correct?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Thank you.
So these all we are defining in the Apex class. We are not going to declare it object level field. No, these all are only for the program purpose. So these fields which we need because we are going to implement certain methods in future. So we need these variables which is used only in the programmatical. These variables does not need a user interface, or we do not need a field inside the object. And the next one is a define Apex class to manage the student details, student name, student ID, class number, games. What is the student name? What is the student ID? What is the class number? What is the games? What are the games that he can play? So what did we learn so far?
Object and class.
Object class. Features of object-oriented programming.
Right.
Access modifiers.
Access modifiers.
Class syntax, access modifiers.
Modifiers, private, public, protected.
Use case.
Ways to define Apex class.
By using developer console.
By using the developer console editor. So that's all for today.